obviously getting very, very close to the first anniversary of Keir Starmer's first year in power. Will he make it to 2 years? I'm not so sure. But let's take a little look back at some of the things over the course of this show that he said. Because one, notice how much younger he looks, and two, notice how robotic he still is. This is fixing the foundations.
Fixing the foundations is like finding damp in your wall. You can paint over it and get the hairdryer out and dry it. All done that. Hope it goes away. Or you can strip it out, rip out the plaster and deal with the problem once and for all.
Yeah. A couple of things there, really, James. Very good morning to you. The foundations aren't in the wall, one. And if you use a hairdryer on them, it's probably not going to be a great idea for the future standing of the building.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably sums up Keir Starmer's first year in office, right? I mean, quite a sort of confused approach to fixing the foundations, constant chop and change, and actually no idea particularly what he seems to be doing or want to do in office.
No. It's Niall Gardner's piece in the Mail today where he talks about a man with sort of no leadership skills, no courage, no ambition, no passion. I mean, it is like being run by a very, very mediocre bank manager somewhere in the sort of the home counties, you know, who gets up every day and goes to work and doesn't really do much of anything all day. I mean, that's kind of what we're dealing with here. And it's all coming home to roost just in time for his first anniversary.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think some people will be crying out for Arthur Mannering to run the country rather than Keir Starmer. I think, you know, it basically, they came in. I remember I was talking to a senior Conservative yesterday, and they just said that they tried to fix the car while it was moving.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that, of course, is, you know, they started up on the word government and then have tried to innovate and try and decide what they want to do in office. And of course, that's incredibly hard because by that point, all the machinery's moving. You've already actually sort of left people who've got different aspirations of what they want to do in office. And that lack of a plan, that lack of any kind of sense of huge mission other than sort of vague goals to improve living standards, etc., I think is really coming back to bite this government.
Well, it has really, because they've been, I think the thing that surprised so many people is the incompetence, the level of inability that they've got to do anything really. And even Diane Abbott yesterday tweeting about Keir Starmer and his interviews at the weekend, saying that, you know, well, of course, I was distracted. You know, when I made that speech about the land of strangers, I didn't really read it because somebody just firebombed my house. And you go, right. And then he says that he didn't really realise that the rebellion was going to be so big on the welfare bill because, in her words, she said, are we really expected to believe that he didn't realise that what he was doing was wrong because he was abroad?
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, it was at that press conference last Wednesday and, you know, he came out and he said this stuff about noises off. And I thought, my God, you know, 126 rebels at that point and you're calling that noises off. That's your entire majority gone. Right. And now he comes out in The Observer on the Friday and then says, oh, I was distracted. I was in foreign affairs. Well, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but the nature of the job means you have to be able to juggle both. And if you're not fully briefed and across the details, or you're not emotionally ready to give a press conference, you need to cancel that and then actually plan it in your own time. And I think the thing that's so striking is that, you know, no one's in ransom seems to be there seems to be no leadership currently going on, which is a great frustration. And actually, by renouncing that Island of Strangers speech, what is jarring is that he said in that speech, "Oh, well, this is not a pre-prepared script. This is from the heart." And now, of course, it was purely from the script.
Yeah, but funnily enough, we watched it yesterday on the show, and he doesn't look as though he doesn't understand what he's saying. He doesn't look like a man who's just reading a script. He looks entirely like a man who is in great solid belief of what he's saying, which is part of his other problem, which is that people now say, well, why would we believe his excuse now that he hadn't read it before? When clearly it was a very, very craven attempt to sort of derail the reform vote in the local elections. And he was hoping that if somebody thought he was tough on immigration, suddenly they might not vote for reform. Didn't work, of course, but, you know, I'm not sure that he's not being entirely truthful here.
Yes, I think it was really striking to see how hard Ed Balls, who's a presenter of GMB now, but of course former politician, married to Yvette Cooper, how hard he went yesterday on Keir Starmer over that U-turn. And there were some reports that Yvette Cooper, his wife, and of course the Home Secretary, was very uncomfortable with some of those remarks. So this is the whole jarring thing, Mike, is that people who went out there and had to defend Keir Starmer's comments, I mean, whether you agree with them or not, defended them, and now he's renounced them, they're left looking like idiots. And of course, this is a growing problem for this government, where they U-turn on welfare, they U-turn on winter fuel, they U-turn on grooming gangs. That's the same problem Boris Johnson had towards the end, which is that who's going to go out and defend you?
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. I mean, we did that when they did the U-turn on the grooming gangs. We listed and we played clips of every single cabinet minister who was sent out back in January to say, you know, we don't need to have a national inquiry because we've already had one, and everybody knows that there's no point in doing it. And, blah, blah, blah. And it was all very, you know, well coordinated. And as you say, they all now look really stupid. Let's have a quick look. I think we've got a clip of the stranger's speech. Check it out.
In a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers.
Say, some might say if you're a student of his delivery, that's one of the more, I would say, forceful and even confident deliveries that he's done, because he's normally kind of stunted with his speech, a little bit stilted, a little bit kind of, you know, stop-start. You know, he was quite flowing there, and he didn't appear to be reading. He wasn't looking down at his script. He might have had a teleprompter, but he wasn't, you know, he didn't look like a man who was unsure of what he was saying. And I know enough about public speaking, as I'm sure you do, when you can kind of tell when people don't know what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's so, I think, jarring then, of course, Mike, is that because he seems so confident there, next time he gives a prominent sort of speech from the bully pulpit of Number 10, he summons the journalists of this country and he says, pounds the table and says, this is what I really mean, everyone's going to say, are you going to renounce it like the Island of Stranger speech? And also, in that same piece, Mike, he talks about his very first speech in Downing Street, in the Garden, where he's talked about sort of things will get worse before they get better. And that was a mistake too. So you think that's 2 speeches, 3 policies renounced in a year. And this is supposed to be a big reforming Labour government with a massive majority first year in office. It's crazy.
And so many things are kind of conspiring against him right now. I mean, only last night, as I was sort of preparing to read a few bits and pieces for the show today, Nissan announces that they're going to slash hundreds of jobs up in Sunderland, not necessarily as a result of Keir Starmer's policies, but the state of the economy doesn't help. It's because there's a bit of a slowdown in sale of electric vehicles, for one thing, which is bad news for Ed Miliband, of course. But also, it's just that, you know, once a politician starts to kind of lose the room, if you like, everything seems to collapse around him.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that Keir Starmer came in at a really difficult time for social democracy. You know, everyone likes to draw comparisons between this government and the Blair-Brown government. It's very different for many reasons. But of course, they were able to hold their electoral coalition together, partly by large state spending and particularly huge spending on the NHS from around 1999 onwards. So I think that that's going to be really difficult, trying to replicate that without the money there. And obviously a very difficult financial outlook and business outlook. And you've, of course, got Donald Trump making a series of decisions which make it much harder for Rachel Reeves in the economy. And for a Labour Party that I think has always favoured larger spending over sort of lower taxes, there's only going to be one incentive, which is bigger state spending, and unfortunately that potentially risks choking off the growth in the economy. Yeah,
I mean, that is the problem, isn't it? And then we wake up to more mad news about Rachel Reeves' plans. She apparently wants to slap a ban on the £20,000 tax allowance for cash ISAs and bring it down to 5,000. Which seems to make absolutely no sense at all to anyone. I know there's a drive from the city to say we must try and get people's savings out of cash and into stocks and shares. But again, plenty of research to say that only 1 in 5 people will do that.
Yeah, I mean, they're spot on, Mike. I mean, this is something that I think the Treasury has always shared from the past 10 years across party lines, Labour and Conservative. They certainly want to get that money into the city to make more use of it. The constant frustration you hear from Treasury officials is that, you know, we're sitting on a gold mine or some such words like that, saying that we need to get this money out there. But of course, if you're therefore disincentivising savers, you do wonder about when people will stop, frankly, deciding to do extra hours for work, because the financial cliff edges are such. You've got that, you've got the point of view on 100,000 in the country, there's a huge financial penalty for that. This stuff is important. And so it's not just about higher taxes, lower taxes, it's just about tax reform as well. And actually, as you say, getting the right rates of ISIS as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening every day to people, and I've got, it's a bit long, so I'll read it later, but so many people saying, you know, we're literally getting out the country. You know, families, not people who have got like large businesses to run or people who can run their businesses online. People who genuinely have got a connection to another country in Europe or wherever it is, whether it's South Africa or Dubai or America, and everyone's just packing up and leaving. You know, I mean, this is not just word of mouth kind of anecdotal stuff. This is, I think, you know, really, really quite fundamental changes in the way that people are seeing their lives and the way that they want to get away from this government.
Yeah, and certainly, and there's really interesting points made by, for instance, Dan Needle, who's a Labour supporting tax accountant. He makes the point that some of the most internationally mobile people are the global rich.
Yeah.
And so the people who are the highest sort of 5% or so, the ones that the left always wants to go after. You've got Richard Bergman proposing a wealth tax. What they don't understand is how mobile these people are. They can spend a few more days or a few less days in this country, depending on how attractive the tax incentive is. And it will be the middle class and the upper middle class who get squeezed as a result of it. People who are, GPs, etc., who may be earning a low six figures or sort of high up to sort of 80, 90,000 or so. Yeah. That is important. And as I say, the overall incentive is important. One of the reasons why you get the economy going is the animal spirits. And frankly, right now, it seems to be sort of putting it on life support.
Exactly right. And I mean, talk about another story that's sort of biting him in the neck. Apparently, British doctors are now going to be given priority for NHS jobs under plans to make the health service self-sufficient in staff. This is the front page of the Times. You'd think this was just, 2 years after the NHS had been started up. So here we are in sort of 1950 with this idea. And it turns out that 2/3 of new doctors recruited to this country come from abroad, which is ludicrous. And everybody knows why that is. The BMA for years have said they want to keep a limit and a cap on the number of English and British doctors who qualify to be doctors in order to somehow keep the prices up, if you like. But Keir Starmer is going to set out a plan designed to get the NHS back on track, they say. Well, it's not going to, is it? We know that.
Well, the danger is, of course, Mike, is that this government is much too operating when it comes to NHS in the interests of producers rather than consumers. So there's a line about sort of all the money that's gone into the NHS since July 2024. 2 out of every £3 has gone to the staff in the NHS rather than sort of improvements in technology. Now, of course, we want to see people within the NHS properly compensated for etc. But also, we need to make sure that we're getting the upgrades, because otherwise, if we just go straight into the trade unions, and of course, you've got the British Medical Association, we've got the leaders of that, the BMA trade union, saying that they're excited by the prospect of more strikes. I mean, the danger here is that a poor industrial policy and a poor industrial strategy with dealing with unions is therefore going to end up costing the health service and the taxpayer a lot of money. As you say there, the important thing is that you get these moves where the BMA is sort of counted on things like staff numbers, and that is a good sign that they're going to look at lifting the cap. But overall, the strategy I don't think is particularly positive when it comes to will these reforms benefit consumers in the short to medium term.
No, absolutely right. James, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. James Hill, Deputy Political Editor. I see that old Jonathan Reynolds is out on the stump again, talking about welfare reforms. The Business Secretary, who doesn't know anything about business, probably doesn't know anything about welfare either. Also, certainly doesn't know anything about being a solicitor, which he pretended to be for about 10 years.